Here's something that should bother every Ethiopian. The most consumed beverage on Earth, after water, was born right here, in the highlands of Coffea, in Ethiopian soil. Discovered by Ethiopian hands, carried in Ethiopian baskets, traded across Ethiopian markets for centuries before the rest of the world even knew it existed. And yet, when scientists finally sat down to give it an official name, they called it Arabica, not Ethiopica, not Coffensis, Arabica. Like Arabia built it, like Arabia grew it, like Arabia was even there at the beginning. How does that happen? How does a plant that literally evolved in your backyard end up wearing someone else's name forever, in every cafe, on every coffee bag, in every scientific textbook on the planet? That's exactly what we're going to answer today. And I promise you, the real story is far more interesting than you think. Let's start with what actually happened. Not the legend, the history. Coffee wasn't discovered in Arabia. It wasn't cultivated first in Arabia. It wasn't even popularized first in Arabia. The plant, Coffea arabica, is genetically native to one place: the montane forests of southwestern Ethiopia, specifically the region historically known as Coffea. That's not folklore. That's genetic science. Researchers studying the DNA diversity of Arabica plants found that Ethiopia contains more distinct genetic varieties of the coffee plant than anywhere else on the entire planet. In biology, that's called the center of origin, the place where a species has had the longest time to diversify. Ethiopia is it. The people of Coffea didn't just stumble on coffee. They lived with it. They chewed the leaves. They crushed the cherries and mixed them with fat for energy on long journeys. They brewed a drink from the husks long before anyone was roasting and grinding the beans the way we do today. Coffee was embedded in the culture, in the trade, in the economy of this region for centuries. Quietly, without a Latin name, without a scientific classification, without anyone in Europe knowing it existed. So how did Arabia enter the story? Sometime around the 10th to 15th century, historians debate the exact date, coffee beans were carried across the Red Sea from Ethiopia into Yemen. The most likely route was through existing trade networks between Ethiopia and the Arabian Peninsula, which had been active for well over 1,000 years. Ethiopian traders, Somali merchants, Arab buyers, goods moved constantly across that narrow strip of water. Coffee was one of them. And here is where Yemen did something Ethiopia had not yet done. At scale, it cultivated coffee as a crop. The Yemeni farmers in the region of Haraz and the Sufi monks in their mountain monasteries recognized what they had. They planted it in terraced hillside gardens. They developed a process, roasting, grinding, brewing, that turned a wild forest fruit into a refined drink. They called it kahwa. They drank it in group ceremonies to stay awake through night prayers. And then, crucially, they controlled the trade. For nearly 2 centuries, from roughly the 1400s to the 1600s, Yemen held a near-total monopoly on global coffee exports. The port of Mocha, yes, the same Mocha that named your mocha latte, was the single point through which all coffee in the world passed. Ottoman merchants, Venetian traders, Persian buyers, everyone came to Mocha. Everyone bought from Yemen. As far as the entire commercial world was concerned, coffee was an Arabian product. Now enter Carl Linnaeus, the Swedish botanist, who in the 1700s created the system of Latin scientific classification we still use today. When Linnaeus encountered the coffee plant, it had already been in European botanical gardens for decades, brought there by Dutch traders who had smuggled seedlings out of Yemen. The specimens he studied came through Amsterdam, through Dutch East India Company networks, all of which traced back to Yemeni cultivation. Nobody handed him an Ethiopian forest sample and said, "This is where it started." The world he had access to said, Arabia. So he named it Coffea Arabica, Latin for the coffee of Arabia. It made complete geographic sense, given what he knew. It wasn't ignorance exactly, it was the limits of the information available to him. The Ethiopian origin wasn't scientifically documented until the 19th and 20th centuries, long after the name had already been published, accepted, and embedded in scientific literature globally. And in taxonomy, the science of naming living things, once a name is formally published, it almost never changes. There's a principle called nomenclatural stability. Renaming a species that has been called by the same name for 300 years causes chaos in scientific literature. So even when researchers in the 20th century confirmed with DNA evidence that Ethiopia was the true origin, the name stayed. Arabica stayed, Ethiopia discovered coffee, Yemen commercialized it, and in the global economy of the 16th century, whoever controlled the trade controlled the narrative. Arabia got the name not because of botany, but because of market dominance. Think about it, we call it English muffins, but they're not from England. We say French fries, but Belgians invented them. History has a long habit of naming things after whoever made them famous, not whoever made them first. Ethiopia made coffee, Yemen made it famous, and Linnaeus wrote down what fame told him. What makes this even richer is that Ethiopia never stopped being coffee country. Today, Ethiopia is the 5th largest coffee producer in the world. It's the only country where Coffea Arabica still grows wild in natural forests, not just on farms, but in the actual forest understory of places like Harena and the Bale Mountains. Geneticists and climate scientists are now traveling to Ethiopia specifically to find wild Arabica varieties that can help the species survive rising temperatures. The genetic wealth that makes that possible. It only exists because Ethiopia is the origin. The name may say Arabia, but every cup of Arabica coffee, every single one, traces its genetic lineage back to Ethiopian soil. Ethiopia gave the world coffee. That's not a claim. That's documented genetics, botanical history, and trade records all pointing to the same highlands, the same forests, the same people. The name Arabica is a historical footnote about who had the trade routes in the 1600s. The origin is not a footnote. The origin is Ethiopia. If you learned something today, or if this gave you a new way to explain it to someone who didn't know, share this video. Because the story of coffee's real birthplace deserves to be told louder than it has been. Subscribe if you want more of this. Ethiopian history, Ethiopian culture, and the overlooked truths that the rest of the world hasn't caught up to yet. I'll see you in the next one.